Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Bull TV. Clay is out today, but we are lucky to have John Haltewanger, politics reporter at Business Insider, back to the show, joining us this morning. Hi, John.
Hi, Carrie.
And hello to you all. We've got a great show lined up. We've got Joe Walsh, former Republican congressman from Illinois and host of the Joe Walsh Show on Newsmax, joining us very soon. Later on, we've also got Darnell Moore, a Black Lives Matter activist and author. Make sure to add your comments, questions below, because we're going to be reading and responding to them live. Do we have our first Skype guest? Joe, you on the line? We're going to hold off till we got Joe. So, busy week.
Yeah, you could say that, to say the least. Yeah.
And I know we're going to be talking a lot about Russia and all that stuff, but I have to flag at the very top of the show that the president signed an executive order this week for a new jobs council for jobs training to fill the 6.7 million job openings, because there's a big disconnect between employers, education, and the people who want to be trained. There's a skills gap. So I had to say that at the top of the show because I think it's been just awash by all the noise.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to talk about the economy right now when Trump is siding with the president of Russia over the U.S. intelligence community. But yeah, sure. We should also give Trump credit where credit is due. And other things were also happening this week beyond Russia.
Right. But we are going to talk about Russia with Joe Walsh. And I think we've got him now. You there on Skype, Joe?
I am. Are you there?
We are. Good morning.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you both.
So, Joe, you've been very critical on social media about President Trump's meeting and press conference with Putin. Can you share your thoughts with us?
Yeah, I called it the final straw. Look, here's the deal. For 19 months now, the president has known that Putin attacked us. And he really hasn't acknowledged that, and he certainly hasn't done anything about it. That's a betrayal. And what we saw this past week at that press conference, as you both said, look, man, he had a chance. Who are you with? Are you with Putin or are you with your own people? And he pretty much said, Putin, you don't hesitate. You say, I believe our own intelligence people. I know Russia did it. We can't let it happen again. He wouldn't do that. The president of the United States betrayed his country on Monday, and it was just for me personally, it was the final straw.
So, but Joe, look, I'm going to challenge you. I agree that the president is not a politician, so he's not going to be the most polished of speakers, but that's why he won, because people wanted someone who would do actions rather than just sweet, fancy words. And when you look at his actions, for example, he is expanding missile defense in Poland, whereas President Obama rolled back the missile defense in Poland. And Vladimir Putin loved when Obama did that. Same thing with the Ukrainians. He armed the Ukrainians, whereas Barack Obama gave them night goggles. So, and he's also slapped on sanctions. Trump has slapped on sanctions against the Russians because of the meddling. So when you look at actions versus talk, don't you see the reality here?
It's a fair point, and again, I don't want to compare him to Obama because I'm certainly no fan of Obama. But look, a lot of what Trump has done actions-wise against Putin, against Russia, the Senate, thankfully, has forced his hand. And I'm with you. Look, I voted for him. I campaigned for him because he wasn't a politician. He was a disruptor. But you're asked a question like that in front of the world. He was given a softball. Who are you with? I don't care if you're not a politician. I don't care who the hell you are. That's an easy question to answer, and he couldn't do it. But more troubling, he's known for 19 months that Putin himself ordered this attack, and he hasn't done anything about it.
So we've seen some polls already about how voters are responding to this, and it seems that actually GOP voters approve of how Trump handled the summit. As opposed to some more mainstream conservatives and some conservatives in the media. We saw on Fox News there were some critical responses to Trump. Do you think that perhaps the Republican Party has now become the party of Trump rather than the party you've known and loved for many years?
Yeah, no, look, and again, I'm a former Republican congressman. Look, the Republican Party sucks. The Republican Party hasn't stood for anything in years. And by the way, that's why Trump got elected. Yes, he has co-opted and taken over the Republican Party. That's fine. And I think most of his supporters, most of the Republican Party voters out there, I think they're confused right now. Look, this whole Russia thing, it's hard to understand. Collusion, Mueller, people's eyes glaze over. But most of Donald Trump's supporters watched him Monday in Helsinki, and they were confused. Like, why can't he answer that question? They're going to stick with him because they have a lot invested with him, and they're hopeful that he can finally turn this thing around.
Well, I would say that I think why a lot of people understand and have empathy, and even Senator Rand Paul said earlier this week, this is a president who's been very frustrated because there's been this kangaroo court of no substantive results and people rushing to judgment against all due process. There's a thing called due process in this country, and the media is completely ignoring it. They like to say that President Trump ignores or is tearing down the fabric of society. There's a thing called due process, and if you respected that as it relates to the Russia investigation, maybe you would treat the president differently. So I think that that's part of why the president is frustrated when it relates to Russia, and when he's talking about it is because there was also evidence that his own counterintelligence and own intelligence officials were trying to actively undermine him in a very partisan way. So can't you see that that's perhaps why the president is a little bit befuddled or at least frustrated, and he understands that his own clandestine services, they don't have his back?
You're right about everything you just said, and I understand why he's frustrated, but doggone it, he's the president of the United States. Imagine how different things would be right now if the day after he got elected and it became public that Russia interfered in our election. Imagine if the president-elect then, President-elect Trump, said, doggone it, I won fair and square, but no foreign government should screw with our election. I'm going to lead the effort to find out what Russia did. I appoint a special commission to find out what Russia did.
Joe, the problem with that is that people would say he's conflicted. So he's damned if he does, he's damned if he doesn't. Let's be honest.
Well, you can hardly blame people for being confused because, you just cited a lot of things his administration has done regarding Russia. And it's true, his administration in many respects has been hawkish on Russia. But Trump himself has confused the entire process by contradicting many members of his administration. I mean, we saw a few hours after the Helsinki summit, Director of National Intelligence Dan Coates had to reassert the U.S. intelligence community's conclusion that Russia did, in fact, interfere in the election and was planning future attacks. So, sure, the Trump administration can say it's been tough on Russia, but Trump's repeated flattery of Putin and kind of his attempt to form this bromance with him has confused a lot of people, understandably so.
I don't know. I mean, Joe, you called President Trump a traitor this week, but I don't think that you called Barack Obama a traitor when he said to President Medvedev, I'll have a lot more flexibility after my next election.
But
and I didn't hear you call
he didn't
Hillary
interfere in the
Clinton
election.
I didn't hear you call Hillary Clinton a traitor when she said we need a strong, prosperous, stable Russia in the interest of the world. And she held up that big red button and said, let's do a reset. Let's have a bromance with Putin. Where were you, Joe Walsh? Why didn't you call Hillary Clinton a traitor?
Look, I almost got kicked off the radio for 6 years because I called Barack Obama all sorts of things. And yes, I called Barack Obama a traitor because I believe Barack Obama was fundamentally trying to transform America. So look, I called Barack Obama out. This is a foreign government who interfered in our election. And from day one, President Trump should have led the effort to find out what Russia did. We're not talking about collusion. There probably isn't collusion, but there's just Russia interference. And Trump has purposely confused the two. He doesn't want anybody to believe that he didn't win fair and square. He's put that, his own reputation, above the well-being of the country. And I just got a problem with that. He should be a bigger man than that.
I think he would argue that having a country that supports a democratic election and gives him his due is fundamentally part of making the country whole, and that you can't separate them. You're trying to separate treating him with fairness with the interests of the country. I think it's actually the same thing.
A foreign government interfered in our election. He's the president of our country. that is a grave threat. And oh, by the way, they're interfering in our midterms. And he's having a hard time acknowledging that. He's the leader of the country. Quit being a Republican. Quit being a thin-skinned 10-year-old and protect this country from a foreign threat. That's not difficult. Come on.
So beyond your comments on the Helsinki summit, you've also been in the news this week because of Sacha Baron Cohen's new show. And you misspoke on Sacha Baron Cohen's new show. With that said, do you buy the Trump administration's claim that Trump misspoke at the summit?
No, I think he means it. I mean, I think everything Trump said there he means. Boy, I certainly did misspeak. I got goofed and I got by Sacha Baron Cohen. But look, Donald Trump, for some reason, and we haven't figured it out yet, he can't get tough with Putin. I don't know what it is. I think what it is he just doesn't want anything to tarnish his 2016 victory. But he's got to be bigger than that. For the sake of this country, he's got to be bigger than that.
Yeah, I mean, he's been tough on countless people, countless politicians from his own party, of course, the media. Why can't he be tough on the president of a country who directed election interference?
That is the million-dollar question, and nobody knows. And again, look, I'm more conservative than Trump, man. I'd build the wall tomorrow. I'd get rid of the IRS. I'd repeal Obamacare. I wouldn't let any Muslim in this country who won't assimilate. I am still a Tea Party conservative. I can't personally support this president anymore because I believe for 19 months he's betrayed this country. That's all.
So was there ever any other point in which you felt that, Trump's been president now for over a year and a half. Was there ever any other point where you felt that maybe this is the final straw, maybe perhaps his response to Charlottesville? I mean, was this really what drew the line for you?
No, because what's fascinating, guys, is I loved his response to Charlottesville. There were two sides, two hateful sides there that went there, and that's why you had what happened. So I defended Trump on Charlottesville. The problem I've had with this president is clear. A while ago, I stopped believing anything that came out of his mouth. He just has a problem with the truth. It's that combined with the fact that our country's under attack and he won't defend us. He's placing his own personal interest above defending this country. To me, that's unforgivable.
Well, I think he's putting American interest first, and a president hasn't done that for a long time. So I don't agree with everything that he says or how he says everything. But I think, Joe, you give yourself a free pass when you misspoke about Sacha Baron Cohen, but you won't give this president. And even the president himself said that he misspoke. He actually went back and corrected what he had said about something in the press conference with Vladimir Putin. So, I hear a double standard with all due respect.
There's also been several walkbacks this week from the Trump administration on the subject of election interference. He was also questioned by a reporter about whether Russia was planning future attacks. His administration has repeatedly said Russia is planning to interfere in the midterms, which makes it very interesting that we've now discovered that they're inviting Putin to Washington in the fall, close to the midterms. So you can understand why people are a bit confused. We have Trump on camera making these statements. And in the press conference with Putin, he didn't, he specifically cited the would versus wouldn't statement. He said, I don't see any reason why it would be Russia. Then he said, I meant to say it wouldn't be Russia. But during the press conference, he also said Putin was very powerful in his denial about election interference. So there were several statements in that press conference and later when he returned that make it very difficult to buy what he's saying.
I just think that so many people, including Republicans, just don't have a sense of history. If you look at George Will, he criticized Ronald Reagan for being too soft on the Soviet Union and to Gorbachev. And now George Will is one of the most outspoken, fire-breathing conservative critics of Trump. It's like, okay, at what point are you going to be conservative, George Will? Like, at what point are you going to see, again, actions speak louder than words as it relates to how this president has treated and the concrete, specific actions he has taken against Russians? And I think it's robust.
Here's the problem. Trump's top intelligence official, here we are 5 days after that meeting in Helsinki, and Trump's top intelligence person has no idea what this president talked about with Putin. That's not good. That's not healthy. There's something wrong with that. That needs to be corrected immediately. Trump's people don't know what he talked about with Putin.
All right, Joe Walsh, we got to leave it right there. Thanks so much for joining us. You'll have to come back. We'll to be continued.
Thank
You
you
guys are great. Thank you.
So he's a very interesting character. And it's interesting, his outlet is Newsmax, whose founder is a very close friend of President Trump. So now that this was the final straw for him, I'm curious to see how he's going to continue to circumnavigate it. It's very interesting because, I'm a big fan of Newsmax. I go on their programming quite a bit. So we got a few comments here. Cheyenne Reed says, hello. Hello, Cheyenne. Ben Ratner. Hey, Ben. He says, how would Trump do in an Ali G prank? Stuttering John got to him and barely tried. I just think he would roll with it. I think that would be, obviously, he'd break the internet with that. Dixie Lee says hello from Boca Raton. And we had somebody watching from, I think they said from Barbados. And I was like, good for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sounds like a nice place to be watching from.
Of course.
Yeah.
So I had on CNN International this week something that had never happened to me before. My microphone wasn't working. I've never had that happen. It was 5 years ago this week that I've started doing national TV. And so it was just one of those bloopers that we were talking about Russia. So I'll play that clip. And then there was a point that I didn't make that I wanted to make that I want to run by you. And I want to get your thoughts, John.
Sure.
We're having an audio problem with Carrie's mic. Pick up your mic for me, Bob. Carrie, talk into this mic. Carrie, give me your take.
So this is not the lowest
just gonna do this
point of President Trump's presidency. If you look at his poll numbers are actually going up relative to when he took office. That's a fact.
There hasn't been a
just happened yesterday.
It just happened yesterday.
Well,
no.
But then
It's irrelevant to
sure,
the
but
conversation.
I am taking a cue. Speaking of, some people have said Republicans have criticized this. Some have supported him, and I take a cue from Senator Rand Paul, who said that this is showing Trump derangement syndrome. And I think that many people are suffering from this, sadly. You might want to take a pill or get that looked at. Senator Rand Paul also said this really shows the hatred that people have for President Trump. And the reality is that actions speak louder than words. The actions that this president has taken, he has expanded the Polish missile defense system. What did Barack Obama do? He rolled it back. He has armed the Ukrainians.
Applaud what the president said? Do you applaud what the president said?
I applaud the president standing up for American interests. Do I agree with every single nuance of what he said? I don't think any American you will see agree with everything that he says, let alone his own supporters.
So the question was, the person sitting next to me whose mic I was using, which is, I was like, even CNN is like a startup. It's like bold, things happen. But the guy I was sitting next to whose mic I was using, and I don't have to use your mic today, which is nice.
We're good.
Bob Cusack was my first boss actually in D.C. But he had said something before that, in his opinion, he thought that this was the lowest point of the Trump presidency. And that's when I brought up overall his polling has been going up. And that was the thing is, people write his political obituary over and over, and yet his poll ratings are continuing to go up. So even if maybe not for this instance, the polling isn't out yet, if you see over and over again, when again people are saying, oh, he's dead, then the polls go up again. So I wouldn't be surprised, and you touched on Republicans and approving of what he said, if the polling again. So honestly, to me, it's more about the reaction where people feel like the media is not giving him a break, and they actually end up helping him because they make him a martyr.
There could be some truth to that. I think, as you said, it might be a little too early to say where the poll numbers will go. I think it is worth noting that his approval rating's around 43%, which is actually roughly what Obama's was at this point in his first term, which is interesting, and I think really puts things into perspective. But I think we've also seen other polls this week that were actually taken before the Helsinki summit that showed that 61% of Americans, this was an NBC News poll, it showed 61% of Americans think the U.S. is less respected around the world because of Trump. Other polls also showed that Americans strongly disapprove of his handling of Russia. Overall, not GOP voters, but a majority of Americans disapprove of his handling of Russia. So even if they know, even if the Trump administration has taken a pretty hawkish stance toward Russia, and as you noted, they sold these missiles to Ukraine. They've expelled Russian diplomats. They've increased sanctions. I think because of his rhetoric towards Putin and his constant complaints about the Mueller investigation and it being a witch hunt, people that, that's swept under the rug. He doesn't even get to take credit for that because he's constantly, showering Putin with compliments. So I think it muddies the waters.
Do you think his poll ratings would be higher then?
I think it's too early to say. I think Trump has proved to be an amazingly resilient president. Compared to other administrations, he has survived scandals I don't think any other president could survive. And yeah, he, as Joe just said, he has a very loyal base that has a lot invested in him and probably will not shift their opinion of him. And, despite kind of this discussion in the media of this being the worst week in Trump's presidency, and perhaps objectively it was, he pushed allies away while, in a sense, embracing an American adversary. History may not judge him well for that, but his voters, they might continue to like him.
Or my interpretation of what he did at NATO was that he helped the allies help America and also help themselves by improving their own defense and not writing off our tailwinds and taking our tax dollars despite their commitments to spend at least 2% of their GDP, which they're not doing.
Sure. Only about, several of the NATO member states have actually reached the 2024 commitment to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. But Trump has also made a lot of misleading comments about how NATO functions, suggesting that Europe needs to pay the U.S. for its protection. That's not how NATO works. NATO is a collective alliance. And
although we do pick up the biggest part,
we do
22%
of the actual direct budget, not the 2% of the defense budget of the GDP. Excuse me. We do pick up the huge chunk of the overall budget. But Trump's comments on NATO, while other presidents have actually pushed for NATO member states to increase defense spending, they took a more tactful approach, I would say. George Bush and Obama pushed for this. They both called for member states to increase defense spending.
But they weren't effective.
You could argue that, but you could also argue that the agreement to increase defense spending was made in 2014 under Obama, and states have all NATO member states, this is a fact, all NATO member states have increased defense spending. Sure, they may not have reached the goal yet, but they have increased defense spending. And also, Obama and Bush didn't necessarily have to insult key U.S. allies like Angela Merkel to their face. I mean, it's kind of audacious to say to Angela Merkel, you're controlled by Russia, only to a few days later go to Russia and side with the Russian president over the U.S. intelligence community.
Well, he had a point.
That takes a lot of gall.
But he had a good point that the Germans are very reliant on Russian oil in ways that we are not.
Sure,
so,
that was a fair point, but maybe he could have, arguably done it in a more tactful way.
Tact and this president.
That's something we can agree on. Yeah.
He's direct. So speaking of direct on Skype, we have Ramsey Touchberry joining us. Ramsey is a politics and breaking news writer for Newsweek. He recently wrote an article on comments made by John Brennan, the former CIA director, about the possibility of Russia recording President Trump and Putin's meeting. Welcome, Ramsey.
Good morning,
Hi, Ramsey.
guys.
Can you tell us about Brennan's assessment?
Yeah, so he issued a pretty scathing rebuke. What he said earlier this week was that he would find it unbelievable if they didn't record it in some manner. And he said that whatever Mr. Trump said in that meeting with Mr. Putin is most likely memorialized on Russian tape and would be used against him in the future. Now, he isn't the only intelligence official that said something like this. The Trump administration's own director of national intelligence, Dan Coates, actually said the same thing this week, is that it's possible the meeting was recorded. Now, why this matters is because, according to intelligence officials, is because they don't know what was discussed in that meeting. The only other Americans in the room besides the president was his interpreter. So it's caused, throughout the week, various intelligence officials to question what exactly was said, what was talked about, what was agreed upon, especially considering now the president has invited Putin back for a second summit later in the fall. So, in order to go into that in the future, I'm sure they will be consulting with the president, pressing him further on what exactly was discussed.
But Ramsey, so some people have thrown around the word blackmail about what he may or may not have said, but I mean, to me, well, first of all, this is all unfounded speculation about what may or may not have been said. But then secondly, what could he have actually said that is actually blackmail worthy? I don't get it.
So it is not proven that it was recorded, of course. I think the way that the administration could clear a lot of this up is by releasing some sort of transcript and releasing more detailed notes. We heard the president later this week come out and say, well, he did press Russia on election meddling, but yet the day of their international press conference, Trump standing beside Putin, refused to acknowledge and confront him about it. So, in order to clear a lot of this up, the White House could release further transcripts on it, could release further details about it.
Yeah, and we have DNI Coates, Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, still saying he has no idea what was said during this meeting. This is America's top intelligence official saying, I have no idea what our president discussed with a former KGB spy master. In this context, some members of Congress are calling for the only other American in the room, Marina Gross, who is a translator, to be brought before Congress to testify about what was said. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Do you think that there's any validity to these calls?
Yeah, so, there appears to be, considering his own intelligence officials are very wary of what was said. That would leave people to believe that she probably should be questioned if the White House won't release any further information about it. Now, Democrats tried to put forward that motion later this week, and it was shot down by Republicans in the Senate. So, whether or not that's going to actually come to fruition is yet to be seen.
And Ramsey, as far as what Brennan said, he said that the president committed treason, which I think is an incredibly inflammatory word to use. And in some respects, wouldn't you say that's almost playing into Putin's hands to say that to have an intelligence official or former intelligence official in the United States so publicly berating his own president, isn't that exactly what Putin wants? And isn't he smiling by that?
So Brennan did issue a pretty scathing tweet where he did say he called the president, treasonous, and it came to high crimes and misdemeanors. I think what Putin is more happy with is the fact that on an international stage, the president didn't directly confront him about election meddling. I think that would be much better for Putin's overall goal, rather than to have his intelligence officials go against him. Obviously, it helps in the fact that they're going against the president, and it seems to be the president is now siding with Putin over his own intelligence officials. Surely the whole mess and debacle and disagreements between the intelligence community and Trump certainly helps Putin. That's not going to hurt him.
Politically, how risky is it for the Trump administration to be inviting Putin back to Washington for a second summit, and also potentially very close to the midterms?
I think it's really shocking considering what's happened over the past week, the bipartisan backlash from lawmakers and how it's played out with people in the conservative side of the spectrum. And like you said, he's having this second meeting, during the midterm elections. Politically speaking, it's potentially very risky. But then again, we've seen polls where, the Republican Party supports his meeting with Putin and supports the outcome. So among his base, it's probably not too risky. Among the general public, it could certainly hurt some Republicans in some swing districts, I'm sure.
Right. Well, and I think that's really heading into the midterms. Where in the list of priorities do you think this will be on voters' minds? Typically it's the economy, and the economy's roaring.
This is true, but in terms, I saw a poll, I think it was within the past week, that showed that a lot of Americans now view Russia, not ISIS, not terrorism, as America's top enemy. So you're correct that people who need to put food on the table are probably not reading up on foreign policy every single morning, and are not concerning themselves with this as much as the economy and jobs and where's my next paycheck going to come from. But Americans are shifting in their views on Russia. I think compared to even a year ago, more Americans seem to view Russia in a very negative light.
Well, I think Mitt Romney would agree. He was very prescient when he called out about that and was mocked by the former president on the debate stage. So it's really, as hypocrisy is a universal sin in politics. We all fall short of the glory of God. We're
Sure.
all making mistakes. And I think that's why we have the show where we can talk about it all. Like we let it all out, and I think that's what's missing in this country, of people coming together, expressing opposing viewpoints, but listening. And Ramsey, we appreciate your perspective this morning. Absolutely, thanks for having me, guys. So, related on this topic of basically having stereotypes from the other side, we've got Mairead McArdle. She's a reporter for the National Review. She's coming back to the show. Welcome, Mairead.
Welcome. So 538 ran a poll that revealed Democrats and Republicans are often wrong about each other. Big surprise. Does this poll indicate a failure of the media to correctly inform the public?
I think it does. I'm not sure if it's all the media's fault, but it definitely does indicate a failure, portraying different groups in an outsized proportion when that's not actually, the percentages are not actually correct. So.
Right, and so it's just a very interesting stereotype that people seem to have of each other. And so we are going to call out the stereotypes through a game here based on the polling that was reported by 538. And so Mairead is going to help us with that. We're going to go through questions from the polls about different demographic percentages of a Democrat versus a Republican. And we're going to write down what percentage we think it is for each demographic. We want you to play along at home. So put your comments of what you think of the percentages and why, and we'll find out the reality. So, Mairead, give us your best shot. We'll do the best we can. We have not looked at the results. So,
okay. Hopefully, you didn't see this paper.
I almost accidentally did on the way here, but I avoided it. Yeah, 538 posted on Instagram and almost looked at it, but I'm good. All
right. It's tempting. The first question is, what percentage of Democrats do you think are atheist or agnostic?
Atheist or agnostic? Okay. Yes. Of Democrats?
Democrats, yes.
All right. I'm going to say I think it's 15%. What about you, John?
I'm close to that, about 17%.
All right. What's the reality?
A little bit too big, only 9%.
9%?
Okay.
Wow.
Interesting.
Okay.
And let's see. What percentage of Republicans earn $250,000 or more per year, do you think?
What percentage earn $250,000 or more? Republicans.
Republicans.
All right. Here's what I think. 10%.
I'm going to go with 30%.
It's 2%.
Whoa! We're both off.
As many rich people.
As Bernie would say, the 1%.
Yeah, I mean, is this pre or post the Fed raising interest rates with inflation?
Yes. What percentage of Democrats are lesbian, gay, or bisexual?
What percentage? Can you read the question again for our viewers, too?
What percentage of Democrats are lesbian, gay, or bisexual?
What do you think, John?
I went for 3%.
I went for 7%.
And it's 6%.
Okay. 6%. All right.
Meet in the middle.
Betting lower now.
6%. Okay.
What percentage of Republicans are 65 or older?
All right. What percentage of Republicans are 65 or older?
Yes.
It's probably going to be higher than the rest of the population, I would guess. So, yeah. I'm going to guess, I think 35% of Republicans are 65 or older.
I'm on the same page.
Match. It's 21.
21.
Whoa.
Wow,
So
okay.
it's a lot. Wow.
Okay.
Oh, that's interesting because if you look at the demographics of people who watch Fox News, according to Nielsen ratings, they say the average Fox viewer is 66 years old.
Yeah.
But I think that maybe it's a lot of retirees who are watching Fox because they have more disposable time and younger people are out working. So
there's also, for me, I thought I based that kind of off of midterms and the fact that generally Republicans tend to do better in midterms, and the demographic during that tends to be older. So. But, hey, I was wrong.
Let's see. What percentage of Democrats are black?
What percentage of Democrats are black? It's a good question. Nationally, it's
13%, so I'm going to go. I went with 10.
It's 24.
24.
Wow,
All right.
Okay.
Well, because I figured...
I'm bad at this.
I figured my math was based on the fact that in the U.S. population, the general population, it's about 11, 12% African American.
Yeah.
So I figured that it was going to be stronger,
More for Democrats,
more proportionately higher.
Yeah.
So that's why I went higher. So in Arkansas, it was even higher in the special election, and that helped push the Democrat to victory. So I'm curious, do you know how they determined their methodology of the sampling? Was it people who had voted or self-identified or registered?
I don't. I'd have to check again.
Very good question.
Yeah, we should. It would be interesting to know if it's voters or
Yeah.
if just anyone if they ask that
Self-identified.
question. Yeah.
There was a fair amount of African Americans that voted for Trump in 2016. I think that surprised a lot of people. So.
Well,
Yeah.
it was only
Surprised
8%,
him.
but compared to Mitt Romney, who got 5%,
A little bit better for Republicans.
that's
I
a
guess.
40% increase. But still, if your base is tiny,
And one more question: what percentage of Republicans are evangelicals?
what percentage of Republicans are evangelicals? Actually, I'm going to go a little bit higher. So I'm going to change it. I don't know. We'll see, though.
I went for 15%.
Oh, I went for 30%.
34%.
Ah, okay. I originally had 25 and I went up to 30.
Yeah,
So,
a little bit
because I
more.
figured the average, I think for the US, it's like 25 maybe? 20 to
Yeah.
25
I think that sounds
overall
about-
American
Yeah.
is
Sounds right.
evangelical.
And
So,
it's decreasing by every year. So,
wow.
yeah.
So, John, which one surprised you the most?
I would probably say the proportion of Democratic voters that are African American. I definitely underestimated.
Yeah. Well, I was surprised because the other part of this is just what it actually is, but the other part of this study was the misconceptions of one party of the other party, and what surprised me the most was well, no, it didn't surprise me, but the biggest difference was how big of a percentage each party thinks are of the Democrat Party are LGBT, because that's been an issue that's very much pushed in the media and in entertainment too. So
What did Republicans? So this was looking at Republicans had misperceptions. So,
and Democrats of their own party of this. So Republicans think that 38% of Democrats are LGBT, and only 6% are, according to this.
38%,
I don't know
that's-
how they would get
They
that
think
number. Wow.
really half of the party.
I know.
If you look at like the total proportion of the population, that
Wow.
doesn't
Just
even make
because
sense.
I guess because Democrats talk about it so much.
Yeah.
They think, well, you must have a lot of voters that are
Well,
in
and
that group.
I remember talking to someone from Religious News Writers Association about if you were to go to any of the mainstream media companies here in the U.S. on the East Coast elite newsrooms like yours, Business Insider, and you were to ask, how many folks in this room know someone who's LGBT, you probably have everybody raise their hand.
Yeah.
Whereas if you ask them, how many of you know an evangelical, you probably wouldn't get any hands that go up. We're very, very few, even though
not on the
proportionately.
coasts anyway.
Yeah. And then, so what percentage of Democrats thought that their own
the
party
Democrats,
was LGBT?
it's let me have to find it again. I think it's Democrats think 29% of their own party are LGBT. So they have an outsized figure in their head too,
Yeah.
which is close. It's close to the same.
I can't help but think back to, I think it was the New York Times that did it following the election, where they showed what Facebook feeds looked like for Republican voters versus Democratic voters, and people just see completely different realities.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who supports LGBT rights, I understand, when you have a problem, it needs to be addressed. Like, you need to push for rights, you need to push for equality, you need to push for treating people decently and fairly and with just basic human respect and treating everyone like a child of God. Like, that's what we need. So I understand why there was so much attention for these issues when there's a big problem.
Right.
But it's just interesting to see quantitatively the mismatch in terms of.
Yeah, you just end up thinking there are much more people in the group, but yeah, because of the focus put on that.
So we got to reassess how we view people, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Stereotypes, or not everyone is what you think.
Nope.
Yes.
All
Don't
right.
judge people.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Mairead.
Thank you so
for
much.
joining us.
Thank you.
Put your comments in. What did you guys think of some of those questions? Were you wrong? Were you off? Were you pretty close? Yeah, I think that polling was very interesting.
Absolutely.
As far as, just showing how much, well, the making 250K, only 2% of Republicans, I think that's something that Bernie Sanders, if he were here, he would say it's fake news. It's millionaires and billionaires, they're everywhere.
That's a good impression.
So we are going to welcome back two friends of the show, Duvalier Malone. He's the author of Those Who Give a Damn, a manual for making a difference. And we've also got John Burnett. He's the CEO of One Empire Group and a New York GOP strategic advisor. Welcome back to you both.
Thanks for having me.
So the Department of Justice recently reopened the Emmett Till case. Do you think that this is a sincere, worthwhile endeavor or possibly an attempt to distract?
I believe I'll start here. I believe that it's not an effort to distract. Having had an opportunity to organize the We Demand Justice rally in my home state of Mississippi, there with the Till family and with many activists, this is something that has been going on for many years, and people have been crying out for justice for Emmett. So I do believe, based on the new book, based on the time frame that the book was released, and the new information from Carol and Brian Dunham, that the Justice Department has an opportunity to look at this information and to dig a little deeper. As I've been saying quite often, that I believe in our justice system, and the mere fact that they are looking at this evidence gives the Till family hope, gives activists hope. So I'm very optimistic to see.
And Duvalier, for viewers who don't know, can you just give a little more context about the specifics of the case and why is it being reopened?
So Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy in Mississippi who was kidnapped and murdered for allegedly whistling at Carol and Brian Dunham and making some sexual advances at her, right? So they came and kidnapped him from his home, took him to multiple locations in Money, Mississippi, and threw his body into the Tallahassee River, after which his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, came from Chicago at the time. And what sparked this particular movement is his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, who said that I want the world to see what happened to my son in Mississippi. And that picture that we see that is shown many times is what sparked the civil rights movement and put it into full gear, because people said, I cannot believe this is happening in America all across the country. And having to say that, just recently, the Blood of Emmett Till, a book that just came out by Timothy Tyson, and the evidence in that particular book, where Carol and Brian Dunham stated that nothing that young boy did deserved what happened to him, and that some of her story had been, that was untrue. It was a lie. And so that's what I believe is now leading to the Department of Justice looking into that. And let's remember that there is no statutory limit for murder. So we're still demanding justice for Emmett.
Right. And those two individuals that murdered Emmett Till are now deceased. However, just like my fellow guest said, that this Carol Dunham actually admitted 10 years ago to Timothy Tyson that he not only did not deserve it, he did not touch me, or anything that she had initially alleged, which drove her husband and her husband's half-brother to actually kidnap, torture, and murder Emmett Till. I don't question the DOJ. What I do question is the author.
Absolutely.
Because why? Because, like I said, the two people that murdered Emmett Till are already deceased. Carol Dunham is still alive. But she told him this 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So why did he hold on to that information 10 years ago? So the DOJ is justified. This is new information. A key person that was there at that time that made the allegation that led to the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Emmett Till is totally justifiable to open the case. In fact, the DOJ would actually have a blemish if they did not open it, especially given the fact that Carol Dunham is still alive and living in North Carolina.
Well, I guess that begs the question, if she told an author 10 years ago, why didn't she tell police decades ago?
Not sure, but the thing is, why hold on to that information for 10 years and profit from a book and then claim
Exactly.
that the DOJ and question the DOJ just because of who's in the White House. That is suspicious.
Well, and
What
even,
is
I guess-
suspicious that you held on to it for 10
Right.
years.
Well, and even if she had told the police, given how corrupt many of these forces were as it relates to properly enforcing justice, I don't know if it would have made any difference. Sadly,
you still let truth move forward.
I mean,
and
maybe she did, and maybe it was suppressed.
Well, actually, no, it's not documented that she's never told anyone. In fact, the last time the case was tried, I believe it was in 2007, and she did not disclose that information. This information was disclosed directly to Timothy Tyson, and I think it's justifiable. I think the DOJ is justified in moving forward because this is credible new information, and not just new information, but coming from a reliable source.
Absolutely. And Timothy Tyson stated on last year that I'm an author, so I don't necessarily look at information in that perspective. I couldn't receive that. You have information here that changed the course of history. And then it came out, you all, right on the edge of Black History Month on last year. So you can't tell me that that wasn't a publicity stunt, if you would.
Right.
Yes.
Or cultural appropriation.
Right, exactly.
But we'll take it anyway because this could be the landmark case. And in fact, Emmett Till's cousin actually said that if this particular new piece of information that the DOJ is looking at could lead to actually closing the case in a justified manner, it gives the country an opportunity to heal.
And how would
Absolutely.
what would that look like, though? Would it posthumously? You can't convict someone who's dead, correct? I mean, you can pardon someone posthumously. We know that Jack Johnson, the boxer that Trump just pardoned.
This is honestly, this is about truth first and foremost, right? And getting her to actually confess under oath is a part of the healing process. This is not about the two men that actually committed the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Emmett Till. They're already deceased. But the person that started it, that falsely accused Emmett Till, if that person comes forth and actually confess, the country can actually start healing and maybe start having a discussion around race relations and really move forward to real healing and not things that are cosmetic.
So without dismissing the validity of this case and the need for justice, is some of the criticism directed at the Trump administration on race relations not still fair? I mean, this is a president who, after a neo-Nazi rally in which somebody was killed by somebody who identifies as a white supremacist, blamed many sides or both sides for what occurred. This is, the Attorney General who has said marijuana is only slightly less awful than heroin, and we know that keeping marijuana illegal disproportionately impacts communities of color. So there's a lot of issues here that this administration is arguably, it's the criticism directed it is fair. So even if this case and the justice needs to be served moves forward and is valid, is some of the criticism still valid?
Look, this is the way I look at it. People will judge President Trump's heart, Jeff Sessions' heart, but when you look at history, when I look at Lyndon Baines Johnson, right, Malcolm X hammered Lyndon Baines Johnson for being a racist. In part, why? Because in 1957, he was head of the Senate and blocked the Civil Rights Bill and had it stripped of the Voter Rights Act and other elements. So when it rose back up to Congress to pass, it was watered down. That was Lyndon Baines Johnson that did that. Then 7 years later, Martin Luther King Jr. and others didn't say, well, he's this, he's racist, he's not going to do it. They engaged. The key is engage.
I'm okay to face a lot of criticism for that.
So what?
Yeah.
The end result is that civil rights was passed.
Yeah.
That's the key. Yep. So in this case, it's not who's sitting in the White House or who's not sitting in the White House. It's about what evidence you have while the person is still alive. And you don't sit around wasting time about this looks suspicious. Mm-hmm. You expedite truth and justice and get it done.
So what do you think the timeline is for this, Duvalier?
I'm not sure of the timeline, but I do believe that we will be hearing something soon. I am with my fellow colleague here that it's not about who's in the White House. It's about truth. It's about justice. Our country and our justice system is greater than who's in the White House. I believe that justice will prevail. Justice have prevailed time and time again in our country. And so I am optimistic, and I give the Justice Department an opportunity to render us a decision, because I respect the Justice Department and those shoulders that the Justice Department stand up on. Yeah.
All right, we're going to wrap it right there. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Love the
Thank you.
perspectives.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Our last segment is our Bookster segment. Bookster is a website and community for book lovers and so much more. We are going to showcase a book by author Darnell Moore. He's an activist and author of No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America. It's a beautiful read, incredibly eloquent, very moving prose. And I don't know if Darnell remembers, but I met him back when he used to work at Mike.com, and he launched a series called The Movement. And so it's great to see him finally back here at Bold. I've been interested in getting him on for a while, so I think this is a great excuse so we can showcase his book and tell more about his life. Welcome, Darnell.
Thank you for having me.
So, Darnell, what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, so I wrote this book for the 16-year-old me. I wrote it for young people who are growing up in spaces like I did. I grew up in Camden, New Jersey. It's a predominantly Black and Latinx city that was narrativized by the media as the hood, as the ghetto. So this, for me, was a way of writing back a love letter, really, to my community, to young people who needed to know that in the face of injustices like racism and antagonism because of one's queer or transgender identity, because of one's lack of access to wealth, that they still have a right to life, that they still have a right to all of the goodness that is contained within oneself and within one's identity. So honestly, like, I remember writing and thinking and visualizing a little quirky boy with glasses on, big glasses like I used to wear, and that's who I was writing to.
We got a picture of that, actually.
Oh my
Let's put the
gosh.
picture. Can we put that picture up on screen? It's inside the book, and I just thought it was so adorable. It's so adorable.
Gotta bring those glasses back.
Oh my! Please don't bring those
glasses. Darnell, those are.
They're gone. I done grown up.
No, you're in your page where you devoted the book, you said our humanity is illuminated by our brokenness as much as it is by our capacity to put ourselves back together over and over again. And you really talk a lot about, and just maybe, I don't want to give away everything from the book, but the reason why the book has that title, tell us why.
Yeah, so the title of the book is both literal and metaphorical. I, at the age of 14, was beat up by a group of neighborhood boys, presumably because of my gender expression. And one of the boys doused me with a gallon of gasoline and tried to light a match, but the wind took the flame out. What's interesting about that story is that so many people always ask, but aren't you mad? Don't you want him to be punished? And I've said repeatedly that by the time I finished the book, all I wanted to do was to make sure that he was alive and well and not incarcerated. Because I'm clear that prisons cannot change hearts and minds. It cannot, if it was homophobia, right? A prison cell can't necessarily fix that. But it's also a metaphor, I think, for what it means growing up Black in this country. And I'm using the fire for Black folk for whom racism has been a tangible thing, not just an idea. And for poor folk, for folk who exist on the edges of the margins, those fires always exist. Some of us survive them and some of us don't. And it was a way of me talking about that.
So we actually just had a discussion that really relates to this in the sense that some might say or some might feel that race relations are moving backwards. We just elected a president who, for years, for example, perpetuated what some people would call racist conspiracy theory about America's first Black president. And among other issues, there are concerns about his views on race. Do you feel that America, overall, its narrative has been progressive on civil rights and race relations, or are we taking steps backwards?
So James Baldwin said the reason why he critiques America is, because he loves it. So I always say, if you love a thing, you won't lie to it or about it. So I believe any chance we have where we're talking about American sort of ideas of race as if we somehow have ascended discrimination, white racial supremacy, and any ideology that creates division based on race would be a lie. And that's and if you really, really love America, then you wouldn't lie about it. We're not seeing. I was about to say we're not seeing, people protesting dogs being released on them until you realize that actually you can see some of those type of images today. I don't believe we can be ahistorical. I think that and then we have to gauge what do we mean by progress? Progress for who, right? I still believe we have lots of work to do, and love means we don't lie, and we don't normalize the abnormal. And we don't make excuses for injustices that are not just ideological, but are material and impacting people's lives every day.
No, I think certainly telling the truth is the only way you get free. Mm-hmm. And the truth will set you free, absolutely. You mentioned the kind of the crossover for people who are poor and on the margins. And as I was reading through your book, I thought a little bit of, obviously, you have the racial element, which needs to be addressed separately and completely, but just in the spirit of, understanding dialogue and what we try to do here at Bold in terms of getting multiple perspectives. I was thinking a lot of the book of Hillbillyology, where you had an individual who was growing up very poor, lots of violence, poverty extreme. Have you spoken with him at all? Do you see any overlap?
I haven't, and I think that there is a need for overlap. I mean, a coalition around economic well-being and economic disenfranchisement is key. The thing I also say is that it's important to understand how these things can be multi-layered. So to be white and extremely economically disenfranchised is a thing. It's a real thing. To be black and economically disenfranchised is double jeopardy, what some people would say. And I think that having an understanding of class relations is not the only way to really comprehensively think about class relations and class struggle is to think about it through a sort of lens of intersectionality. That's fancy for saying that when I think about the life worlds of, say, a black, transgender, young person who's living on the streets of New York, I work with some of them, that's a very different type of economic precarity than what we might see in a book like Hillbilly, right? I'm not making a claim about a hierarchy of those things. What I'm acknowledging is that there needs to be some nuance around how we understand class relations with regards to how it's shaped by race and sexuality, gender, and so much else.
Yeah, no, and I think especially even just at a young age to teach children this is, so for me, my parents were on welfare when I was younger, and I actually went to some urban schools where I was in the minority, and I was picked on for being white, and with the schools that I went to, 95% African American. And what was funny, because when I was reading your book, I remember once where I was picked on and they called me a lesbian. I'm actually straight, but that was a slur, and they were trying to attack me, and they thought that my family was from Ireland because they thought I talked funny. So that I was basically an Irish lesbian. And I was just like, no, I'm just a poor white girl. And I didn't even know how to respond. I felt terror, like I was afraid. So I understood at a different, and no, they didn't try to light me on fire. So it's not even close to that. But I understood.
Well, thank you for reading the book. In so many ways, literature can be both a window and mirror. And I think too many times we're reading literature that are mirrors, that are reflecting our lived experiences, the stuff that's keen to us. But we do need now, more than ever, literature that are windows. That is, giving you access to other life worlds different than your own. So that can then shape and expand the way we come to think about the world and people. And so many times we're talking to people who think like us, who look like us, who are reflecting so much of what we believe and often what we look like and how we move through the world. But we need to look through windows. And that's why I offer this book, and I'm happy to be in conversation with you all.
Thank you, Darnell. So if this becomes a movie, who do you want to play you?
Oh, my gosh. I don't even want to think about that.
Too bad. I just said, yeah, you got to.
I don't know. Who do I know that's like a quirky little black boy with big glasses? I have no clue. The young brother that played on Moonlight, he was amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic
We had the
movie.
Moonlight director here.
Oh, nice.
On our
Barry
show.
Jenkins is amazing. Yeah.
That's so cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for
Thanks for
joining
having
us.
me
Thanks
on.
for sharing your
Thank you,
story.
Darnell.
I'll be sure to
Appreciate
check out this window into his soul. Check out the book, No Ashes in the Fire, Growing Up, or Coming of Age, Black and Free in America. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us here today on Facebook and Periscope. Don't forget to like our page, Bold TV, on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Thank you for joining, John, for
Thanks
the
for having
ride.
me. Yeah.
And stay tuned here on Bold TV. We're coming right back for Bold Business at 12 Eastern, and then for Bold Life at 2 p.m. Stay tuned. Have a great weekend.